to where free agents will end up. Nobody more reckless for our money than our friend Will Leach of MLB.com, who's been trying to identify landing spots for some of the prime free agents on MLB.com these last number of weeks. Will, good morning to you, and let's start right in with the guy who we just saw a little hero rip a video of, DJ LeMahieu. Is the Bronx the best landing spot for him, or are you cooking up other places for 2021?
Yeah, the Yankees seem to make the most sense. They clearly, it's strange to think of all the big names there. He has probably been the most valuable guy for the last 2 years. I know they feel like they got him on a little bit of a deal. Remember when he was signed, they almost thought he was like, where's he going to play? And now it's like, well, you'll find a place for DJ LeMahieu to play. But I have to say, this is one of those things where the Cano news, obviously, with the Mets, eventually put up an opening for them. And I think that the Yankees are still the favorite, but obviously your eyebrows had to raise when you see the Mets, a team that's very eager to make some moves, and I'm sure they would love to kind of stick it to the Yankees.
Will, I saw your list for George Springer, and I thought it was interesting. An East Coast kid, went to UConn, so it totally makes sense for me that the Mets and Red Sox are on that list. But I was very surprised that the number one team that he had on was George going back to Houston.
Yeah, it's hard. It's almost a probability type thing. Because as I wrote in the piece, the Astros seem the more likely than any other teams, but not the most likely to be picked, if that makes sense. Like, it's almost that, like, there's so many suitors for Springer I think the Mets are probably the top contender other than the Astros. But like, at the end of the day, I don't think he's going to go back to the Astros, but I think it's more likely he goes back to the Astros than any individual team, if that makes sense. Just because there's going to be so many suitors and so many teams going on, like not just the Mets, the Red Sox, the Braves, the White Sox. Some people have even argued the Cardinals would get in there. I'm not sure about that exactly, but there's so many suitors that, like, I wouldn't say the field against the Astros. I would pick the Astros, but I also see question marks, frankly, for each one of those teams. At the end of the day, I would say it's maybe 21% Astros and 20% Mets and 19% Red Sox, and then I'll run out of math if I keep doing the teams. But eventually, trust me, it gets to 100.
While we're talking about the biggest names on the market, let's get right to Trevor Bauer. And I think the same case with George Springer. There's no shortage of interest. It's just who's going to pony up the best deal.
Yeah, and Bauer's interesting too because, listen, Trevor Bauer's obviously a great pitcher. He won Cy Young. He's a terrific player. There are other things involving him that some teams may or may not want to take on when it comes to Trevor Bauer. That's a difference with him and George Springer. But it also makes it look like a team like, theoretically, the Mets. He almost feels like, man, just Trevor Bauer with the Mets just seems like lots of fun New York Post back page headlines waiting to happen on a pretty regular basis. So it makes a certain amount of sense. But yeah, that's the thing with Bauer. You look at Springer. That's the difference between like a LeMahieu and a Springer. You have to find an opening for LeMahieu. He plays a few positions, but you have to find a place. Everybody needs an outfielder, and everybody needs a starting pitcher. And so to me, that's why it completely opens up for someone like Bauer. That's why with someone like Springer, you almost have to be like, yeah, I guess the Astros are the most likely team because there's so many other teams in the running. It's really just kind of a crapshoot.
Whereas in years past, Will, a lot of the bigger names have waited until later in the market, and I'm thinking notably of a handful of Scott Boras clients that waited notoriously late before signing, from Prince Fielder to Bryce Harper and a lot of names in between, because of all the strangeness around this year's market that we know to be true. Do you get the sense that this business will be executed sooner rather than later, or is it going to be business as usual with some of the bigger names and they are going to wait a long time?
To be honest, if I'm the agent for, say, Marcell Ozuna, who, let's not forget, almost won the Triple Crown last year, if I'm the agent for someone like him, I'm really not ready to get in the market until I know whether the National League has a DH. And I feel like baseball has so many things about next year that they still have not entirely figured out yet, and I think are going to affect these markets. To me, that makes it more likely, not so much the big free agents waiting for the last second in, as you said, like the Boras way, just more that, like, there's still just so much uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty about what the beginning of next season is going to look like, when it would even theoretically it could be pushed back. I don't think it would be, but it's certainly possible. There's so much uncertainty that it feels like players and agents would want to wait just the way that teams would want to wait, because like, who knows, things change so quickly. Who knows how things are going to look in a month? Who knows how they will look in 2 months? I think it's reasonable. Of all years, I get frustrated. I love watching MLB Network and wanting to know what's going on now. I don't like going through December and January and still having things up in the air. But I do think it makes a certain amount of sense this year, because really nobody even knows necessarily the rules of the playing field right now, let alone what the market's going to look like.
Will Leach ranking the destinations of some of the top free agents on this year's market. Will, appreciate the visit as always, and we'll talk to you next week.